Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
I will start with the part everyone wants to hear, because pretending we are easing into it with pleasantries would be fake, and I am past the point of playing nice. So picture me sitting at my mother's table 2 days after my birthday that she apparently could not be bothered to remember, while she slides a plate toward me with a smile that is all surface and no depth and says that a slice of chocolate cake should make it up to me. As if sugar can patch over years of her choosing my brother. First, and I hear my own voice come out calm and almost soft when I tell her that I am actually full and maybe Josh would like it instead, because he always does. And the room goes quiet the way rooms do when a tiny thing lands with the weight of something much bigger behind it. You know how families do that dance where one person acts like everything is fine and everyone else pretends to believe it because it is easier than calling out the obvious? Well, that is exactly what we were doing, except I was done pretending. And while Mom was cutting the cake like she was hosting some charity bake sale, I was looking at the frosting and thinking about last weekend when she posted photos from the airport with the caption about sending Josh off on his big European adventure to celebrate his new contract, even though my birthday was in the same week, and I got a text with a late apology and a heart emoji that looked like it was pasted in by muscle memory, not care. I did not raise my voice, I did not make a speech, I did not mention the years of her rushing to fix his messes and talking down my wins like they were cute little hobbies that would pass, because none of that would have mattered, and if there is one thing I have learned, it is that no argument on earth will wake up someone who is determined to sleep through your feelings, so I went with something she could not brush off and something he would never forget, and I did it in the most normal voice possible because real power does not need volume, it needs timing. I looked at Josh and said he should take the first bite since it was still warm from the oven, and he grinned the way he does when he knows he is the star of the night. And the fork scraped against the plate in that tiny metallic sound that feels like a cymbal crash when you are waiting for it, and I told him to go ahead and make a wish since Mom forgot mine, which got a nervous laugh from her and a chuckle from him. And he said he did not need wishes because hard work pays off, which was rich. Coming from a man whose hard work has mostly been finding the softest landing wherever he falls. I did not make eye contact with Mom when I nudged the plate closer, but I felt her watching me like she suddenly remembered I am not as easy to handle as she tells people, and that was the first moment in a long time that I saw hesitation on her face. Because even if she did not know why, she knew I was not the one holding the short end of the stick anymore, and that thought gave me a kind of steady breath that I have not felt since I was a teenager trying to convince her that fairness should not be a seasonal item. The thing about cake, especially the kind she bakes, is that it is never just cake. It is tradition and apology and distraction baked into one neat slice, and when I said I was full, I was not just talking about food. I was talking about being full of the same old script where I smile and say it is fine while they plan another celebration for him that I am invited to as a backdrop, and I am telling you this now so you understand why I let him have the first forkful, and then the second and then the third, because this was not an outburst, it was a conclusion, and conclusions deserve to be clear. Josh kept talking between bites, the way people do when they believe they are safe and adored, and he teased me about being dramatic about a birthday because he always reduces anything that is not about him to drama. And I told him that the only drama I am interested in is the kind that ends on my terms, and he rolled his eyes, and Mom said my name in that warning tone she uses when I am about to ruin her evening, and I said I was not ruining anything. I was just accepting her offering like a good daughter. Only I prefer to share, and it is funny how that sent a flicker across her face like something finally clicked, because for a second her hand tightened on the table edge, and she looked at the slice, as if it could answer a question she did not want to ask. I leaned back in my chair not because I wanted to look cool or detached, but because I was done leaning forward, done chasing, done explaining, and I wanted them to feel the space I took up without asking for permission. And as Josh lifted the fork again and laughed at something on his phone, I watched Mom's smile falter, and I saw a small calculation run behind her eyes. And maybe she remembered a conversation from a few weeks ago about ingredients and sensitivities that she dismissed as me being difficult, or maybe she simply realized that catching a flight to send her son off with champagne while sending her daughter a late text comes with interest due. So here is the part where I tell you the moment the fork touched his tongue the third time. I did not flinch or speak or make a scene. I just placed my hands in my lap and listened to the room the way you listen to a door unlocking. Because one way or another something was about to open, and when his breath hitched and Mom's face went pale and the table went so quiet you could hear the clock in the hallway counting each second like a referee, I kept my eyes on the plate and let the silence lay. They're heavy and honest, and I waited, because this time I was not going to be the one rushing to fix anything, not an excuse, not a mess, not a feeling. If you want to understand why I sat there and let the quiet stretch while Josh took those bites like he was untouchable, you need to hear about the years that got us to that table. Because none of this came out of nowhere and none of it was fueled by a random flash of temper. It was built on a long line of moments where my mother chose convenience over truth and spotlight over balance. Starting with the way every small success of his became a family production while anything I did was met with a pat on the head and a reminder not to brag because humility is attractive on a woman. Which is hilarious when you consider the way she filmed him opening gifts like she was a media department and posted his plane tickets as if miles flown could be saved up and redeemed as character. There was the vacation that still sticks in my throat, the one she called a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, even though it was the third trip she funded in 2 years, and the timing fell right over my birthday week. And I remember the photo of them at the departure gate where she wrote about how proud she was of her boy chasing culture and courage. And I stared at that caption until the letters blurred because I had just sent her a message saying I would love to do a small dinner on the weekend if she was free, and she replied the next day with a quick apology and a promise to celebrate later, which is the family version of a rain check that never clears. And when I brought it up in person, she launched into a speech about how I should not keep score. As if keeping score were the issue rather than the game being rigged from the start. If you ask her why it is like this, she will say he just needs more support, that some people require encouragement and other people are naturally independent, and she will deliver this with a tone that suggests she is complimenting me. Except what it really means is he gets tangible help and public praise while I get a label that lets her off the hook, and the label is that I am difficult. Which covers everything from asking why he gets expensive trips to asking why she forgot my birthday call. And over time I learned that being difficult simply means refusing to shrink to fit a space that is too small on purpose, so I stopped trying to be agreeable and I started taking notes, real ones. Because it turns out I am very good at patterns, and my family runs the same ones over and over. One of those patterns involved food, because my mother loves to host and she loves to be known for a few signature things, which would be fine if she listened when someone said a certain ingredient did not sit well or that a particular frosting triggered reactions. But she hears that as an attack on her talent and barrels ahead anyway, and there is a history here of Josh insisting he is fine because he cannot stand being seen as fragile, and Mom insisting her desserts are safe because she cannot stand being corrected, and the two of them reinforce each other's denial like a closed loop, while I am left as the only person who reads labels and asks questions and gets told I am creating problems. Months back, we all sat around her table and I mentioned, casually and without dramatics, that maybe he should carry his pen again since he had a scare last year that got brushed aside with jokes and bravado. And he laughed and said he had outgrown all that and he was not living like a person who needed to check everything, and Mom chimed in about how life is too short to be ruled by fear, and I remember thinking that life is also too short to be ruled by ego. But I did not say it, I just logged the fact that he had stopped keeping anything on him, and that she took pride in baking the same rich desserts without adjusting a thing. Then I went home and sat with the kind of clarity that makes you very quiet, because you can see the shape of a choice forming and you know you are the only one in the room who recognizes it. I am not going to spell out recipes or steps or any of that, partly because it is not the point and partly because I do not want to be that person, but I will tell you that I pay attention when people advertise their carelessness. And I pay even closer attention when my mother dismisses my concerns with that thin smile that says I am making the night harder than it needs to be, and when I heard her bragging on the phone to an aunt about her improved frosting that made everything silkier. I heard the exact word that mattered to me, and I did not challenge her because nothing I say ever changes her process. I just adjusted my own. which in this case meant I started preparing for an evening where I would not be the one left empty-handed. People love to say revenge is poison you drink yourself, but those are the people who have never been made to sit through a lifetime of small humiliations dressed up as family traditions, and I am not interested in hurting anyone just to hurt them. I am interested in balance, and balance sometimes looks like making sure the person who always gets rescued feels the edge of what it means to be responsible for their own body, while the person who always does the rescuing understands that her negligence is not covered by a smile and a caption. So yes, when I accepted that dinner invitation 2 days after my forgotten birthday, I had already run through the likely menu. I had already heard the compliments she would fish for. And I had already decided there would be no scene from me, only a mirror held up long enough that neither of them could look away. Here is the part that matters to the moment you just heard about. The one with the fork and the sudden silence, and my chair leaning back like I finally found a way to sit that did not make my spine curl. Because while Josh was busy proving to everyone that he was beyond precautions, and while Mom was busy proving to everyone that criticism rolls off her like rain, I did something very boring and very adult, which was to make sure I could stop a bad situation if it got there, and I mean that. Literally. Because I am not a monster and I am not careless, and when I say I was in control, I do not mean I wanted anyone harmed, I mean I wanted the truth to finally land, and that is why. When his breath hitched and her expression shattered and the room filled with the thud of their panic, my purse was already unzipped, and the thing he stopped carrying months ago was in my bag, placed there hours earlier with a calm hand. And I knew that whatever happened next would happen on my timing. Because for once in my life, the decision about when to help and how to help was mine. From the outside, the weeks leading up to that night probably looked like a stretch of me finally smoothing things over. Because I stopped arguing about the little digs and I let the conversations flow without inserting myself to correct a false memory or point out a selective truth. But the reality was that I had simply decided it was not worth letting them see where my mind was, and it is surprising how much you can accomplish when people believe you have given up. I went to family dinners. I laughed at Josh's recycled stories even when I had heard them so many times that I could have mouthed the words along with him. And I nodded when my mother talked about her plans for the holidays as though there was a place for me in them beyond filling a seat to make the table look full. What they did not notice, or maybe noticed but dismissed, was that I was paying closer attention than ever, watching not just what they said but how they said it, what they avoided, and what they assumed I did not care about anymore. It started small, the way most strategic things do. I asked Josh about his trip in a way that sounded admiring, letting him list the cities like he was unveiling a trophy cabinet, and I let him talk about the food as if he were a seasoned critic instead of someone who thinks flavor is measured in portion size. Every time he mentioned a dessert, I filed away what it had in it, the textures, the toppings, the sauces. When Mom chimed in with her own stories about what she baked while he was gone, I asked questions about ingredients, nodding with that slight smile people take for interest when it is really calculation. I made sure to be the one to clear plates, the one to refill coffee, the one to lean in when she mentioned a recipe change. The trick was to make myself seem neutral, to lower the guard that usually goes up when I am in the room, so they could continue underestimating me without realizing they were handing me every puzzle piece I needed. Josh had this habit of boasting about how he could eat anything now, and he said it with the same tone someone might use to say they had conquered a mountain, as if his body's warnings were just obstacles to be overcome rather than alarms meant to be respected. He bragged about ignoring expiration dates, about trying street food in back alleys overseas, about breaking his doctor's caution as though it were a personal victory. Mom would laugh and tell him he had her genes, that her baking must have toughened him up, and I would smile because that was exactly the kind of thinking that would make them both sloppy. By then, I had already decided I was going to make my point in a way that could not be undone with a lecture or brushed off with a joke, and the irony was that all I really had to do was give them what they claimed to want, the freedom to live without fear. There is something very clarifying about accepting that someone is not going to change for you. Once I stopped waiting for my mother to finally recognize the imbalance she created, I could focus on what I actually wanted from the situation, which was not an apology or even a change in her behavior. but an undeniable moment where she had to look at me and understand that I was not the person she had decided I was, the difficult one, the overreactor, the jealous sister. I wanted her to feel the shift in control without me having to declare it out loud. So I made sure to be agreeable, to pick my moments carefully, to plant comments that would seem harmless until the night they were suddenly the context for everything else. The opportunity one needed came sooner than I thought. She invited us both over under the guise of a casual dinner, one of those I thought it would be nice evenings that often served as showcases for Josh's latest achievement. When I walked in and saw the cake cooling on the counter, glossy and perfect, I felt that small, quiet click of recognition that the moment I had been building toward had arrived. The conversation stayed light, almost boring, but that was the point. Boredom lowers people's defenses. I played my role, asked for the recipe again as if I had not heard it before, complimented the aroma, and watched as she basked in the praise. The thing is, you cannot pull something like this off if you are reckless or emotional in the moment. You have to already know exactly what you are doing and why, and you have to be prepared for every outcome, including the one where you are called the villain. I had run the scenarios in my head so many times that nothing could have surprised me at that point, and I knew that if I handled it calmly, if I gave Josh that first forkful without a hint of malice in my tone, it would land exactly the way I wanted it to, as a gift from the sister who was finally letting go of old grudges. And that is exactly how it happened. In the weeks before, I had thought about whether I would feel guilty, whether the satisfaction of making my point would be worth the inevitable storm it would stir, and the answer I came to was that guilt only sticks when you act without reason. I had reason stacked higher than the cake itself. I had years of exclusion, belittlement, and neglect packed into the layers of my decision. And I knew that once it started, there would be no going back, which was precisely why I made sure that when the moment came, I was in complete control of how far it would go. So by the time that plate slid across the table toward me, my mind was already settled. I would pass it to Josh, I would watch him take it without hesitation, and I would let my mother see something in my eyes that she could not name but would never forget. That was the beauty of it. The setup was invisible until it was too late, and the people who thought they knew me best had no idea that I had been arranging the pieces for months, one polite nod and one forced smile at a time. The evening itself did not announce anything unusual at first glance, because my mother had always been good at creating these dinners that looked, from the outside, like warm family gatherings meant to bring everyone together. And I knew better than to show any sign that this one was going to be different, which is why I walked in carrying a bottle of wine I had picked up on the way, smiling in a way that felt almost natural, greeting her with a tone that made it seem like I was genuinely happy to be there, and hugging Josh as if the last decade of favoritism and dismissal had never existed between us. The truth was, my heart rate was steady, my thoughts were already moving 2 steps ahead of every exchange, and I was focused entirely on making sure that nothing in my expression, my voice, or my movements betrayed the fact that I had been waiting for this exact configuration of people, circumstances, and timing. The table was set in that way my mother likes to do, with more attention to symmetry and presentation than to whether the conversation that would happen there would actually feel welcoming. And Josh was already leaning back in his chair with the same unearned confidence he had been perfecting since we were kids, throwing out little comments about work, travel, and the crazy demands of his job in a way that positioned him as the one carrying the family's pride on his shoulders. I laughed when appropriate, asked him questions that made him keep talking, and let Mom beam at him like he was single-handedly holding the economy together. All the while, I was watching her move between the kitchen and the table, timing the moment when she would bring out the dessert she had mentioned more than once over the phone, that rich, glossy chocolate cake she had been proud of perfecting. The one she claimed tasted even better than the original recipe she used to make. Dinner passed in that slow, predictable rhythm of polite conversation and small boasts, with just enough nostalgia sprinkled in to give my mother the illusion that we were having a genuine family night. I kept my contributions light and agreeable, because part of controlling the outcome meant making sure they were both exactly where I needed them emotionally, relaxed, confident, certain that I had long since given up any notion of challenging the dynamic. When she finally disappeared into the kitchen to slice the cake, I knew that this was the point where everything I had prepared for would start to lock into place. She came back with 3 plates, each slice arranged carefully like she was presenting something on a cooking show, and she set one in front of me first. The gesture clearly intended to signal that this was her way of making up for missing my birthday. As if this single act could smooth over not only that oversight, but the years of similar ones before it. I looked at it for a second longer than necessary, just enough for her to notice, and then I smiled in a way that carried no trace of resentment and said that I was still full from dinner, but Josh should have it, because it looked too good not to be enjoyed right away. The shift in her expression was almost imperceptible, but it was there, a flicker of something that might have been suspicion or maybe just surprise, though she recovered quickly and set the plate down in front of him. Josh, true to form, didn't hesitate for a second. He picked up the fork, made a quick joke about how I must be on some new health kick, and dug in like the slice in front of him was a prize he had earned simply by showing up. I watched his first bite disappear, listened to him talk around the second, and saw the third disappear without so much as a pause. My mother tried to keep the conversation moving, but her eyes kept drifting toward me, and I knew she was trying to read my expression, to find some clue as to why I was letting this moment pass without taking even a single bite of what she had prepared for me. I didn't give her anything, just leaned back in my chair, letting my posture tell the story she couldn't quite put into words. By then, I could feel the tension starting to form in the air, not in any obvious way, but in the subtle way a room changes when something unspoken is hovering over it. My mother was talking less, Josh was still eating but slower now, and I sat there in complete control of my breathing, my tone, my body language. I knew that within minutes, the balance in that room would shift, and there would be no going back to the way things had been. This wasn't about cruelty. It wasn't about harm for harm's sake. It was about forcing a moment of clarity they could not dodge, a situation in which the person who always assumed safety would suddenly have to acknowledge that they were not untouchable, and the person who always assumed control would have to see that she had been blind to the details that mattered most. I didn't rush anything. I didn't push for a reaction. I let the minutes stretch out naturally, because part of the impact would come from how slowly the realization crept in. When Josh finally put the fork down and shifted uncomfortably in his chair, I didn't look at him first. I looked straight at my mother. Her eyes met mine for just a second, and in that second, I saw the exact moment she understood that she was no longer the one deciding how the story went. The rest would unfold on its own, but that single look was the confirmation I had been waiting for all along. The shift did not arrive with shouting or overturned chairs. It arrived with that small, ugly sound people make when their breath decides it has had enough of their bravado. And when Josh's hand went to his throat and his eyes searched the air as if someone had stolen the oxygen out of it, my mother froze the way she always does when the story stops following her preferred script. So I did the one thing I had promised myself I would do if it came to this, which was to move without panic and without commentary, because nothing dilutes truth like a performance, and nothing rattles a person who lives on control like an outcome that does not wait for her permission. I said his name once, slowly and clearly, not to soothe him but to anchor the moment in something that could be recorded later if anyone tried to rewrite it, and while my mother's hands fluttered uselessly over the table like she was searching for a rewind button, I opened my bag, pulled out the pen he had stopped carrying months ago when he decided he was invincible, and I told him I had him, that he needed to sit still, that he needed to breathe when he could and stare at me, not at her. Because I was the one acting, and I pushed the cap off with the kind of steady pressure that only comes from repeating emotion in your head 100 times before the day you need it. He shook. My mother whispered my name like a warning and an apology trapped in the same breath. And I will not pretend I did not feel the smallest flash of anger at the fact that I was yet again the person stepping in while she simply watched the consequences of her own choices unfold, but anger was useless in that second, so I set it aside and did what needed doing. When it was done and the worst of the panic passed across his face and then away from it, I put the pen on the table where everyone could see it, and I told my mother to call for help. Not because I did not trust what I had done, but because I wanted strangers with uniforms and paperwork to walk into that room and turn the entire evening into something that would live beyond our family's habit of denial. And when she still hesitated, I took her phone and made the call myself, spoke in the calm voice that operators prefer, gave our address, explained what happened, and made sure to use the words that matter for forms and reports, the ones about known allergies, discontinued prescriptions, and a dessert that had been made with ingredients that should have been considered, because if the pattern in our family is to forget what is inconvenient, then I was going to build a memory for them that arrived with sirens and notes. We had a few minutes before help arrived, and in those minutes my mother tried to find a version of events that made her less responsible, so she started with the tired line that she had made the cake the way she always had and that nothing had ever gone wrong before. And I told her in that same even tone that habit is not a safety plan, and that the new frosting she had bragged about contained the exact thing she had waved away as fearmongering when I mentioned it on the phone, and before she could argue, I stood, walked to the trash, and brought the empty container back to the table because I had seen it in the bin when I poured water a few minutes earlier, and the label spoke for itself in bold type she could not ignore. And her mouth closed in a line that told me she finally recognized the shape of the mess she had tailored. The paramedics came, checked him, asked questions, and I answered them with a patience I did not extend to my family anymore, because I wanted each sentence to move from my mouth to their clipboard unchanged. And when they asked who administered the injection, I said I did. And when they asked whether he normally carried one, I said not anymore. And when they asked whether the dessert had been made at home, I said yes and gestured to my mother. And I watched the way the words landed on her shoulders like actual weight after a lifetime of watching praise land there instead, and I do not mind telling you that it felt like a form of balance I could live with. They recommended the hospital for observation, and I did not argue, and neither did she, because the part of the story where she resists experts was over for the evening. Before they left, I took a picture of the label and of the used pen on the table, not to post anywhere or to humiliate anyone, but to keep a record that could not be softened later by nostalgia or spin. And I sent the images to my own email with a short note that said, in plain language, that he had a reaction, that I administered what he no longer carried, and that the dessert had been made with an ingredient he should avoid, because I know my mother. And I know that by tomorrow she would be sniffing around for a narrative that excused her and mocked me, and I wanted to meet her story with facts that did not need my feelings to make them true. At the hospital, while Josh was stabilized and lectured gently by a nurse who had probably delivered the same warning 100 times to people who believed they were exceptions, I stepped into the hallway with my mother. And I told her two things in a voice so quiet she had to lean in to hear it, which suited me fine because I was done performing for anyone. The first thing I told her was that I was done being the extra in a story that revolves around her son, and that if she wanted me at her table again, the next invitation would arrive with my name at the center of it for once, not as a prop to make the room look full. The second thing I told her was that I had placed 2 pens in Josh's bag earlier that day, and that I would not be replacing them if he decided he was above carrying them, because I had spent enough years saving people who refused to save themselves. And tonight had been my last unpaid shift. She stared at me, pale and shaken, and tried to say she was sorry for missing my birthday, for the vacation, for all of it, and I stopped her with a small shake of my head, not out of cruelty, but because I did not need an apology she had not earned. I needed a change I could measure, and for once, I had built a situation where measurement would not be subjective. When Josh was discharged with instructions he would either follow or ignore depending on whether tonight had taught him anything, I drove them home because it was easier than watching my mother swerve through tears, and when we reached the house I did the last thing I had come to do. The piece of the plan that made the whole night feel like closure rather than chaos. I walked to the table where our plates still sat, placed a small envelope next to the empty cake plate, and told my mother to open it after I left. Inside was a receipt for the 2 pens and a note that said, in the same handwriting she used to put on lunchbox napkins when I was a kid, that I would not be accepting made-up cake in the future, and that if she forgot me again, I would not be available to be found later, because I was not starving anymore. I hugged Josh, quick and real, because I am not heartless and because I wanted him to feel that the person who saved him was the same person he had called dramatic an hour earlier, and I told him I hoped he enjoyed Europe and that I hoped he enjoyed breathing more. And then I walked out into the kind of night that does not require commentary to have meaning, and I got in my car and I drove home without checking my phone, because for the first time in a long time, I did not need anyone to tell me I had been right. I had not needed to humiliate them or to scream or to break anything. I had simply let their choices meet the consequences they had been dodging, and then I had taken control of the part that could have turned tragic. And I had made sure the record would outlast the spin. If you are waiting for the tidy family bow, you are going to be disappointed, because some families do not do tidy. They do temporary truces and long silences and sudden invitations that are really auditions. But I am fine with that now. Because the balance is different and they know it, and whether they say it out loud or keep it cramped in their throats is not my problem anymore. I did not need an apology, and I did not need a party. I needed a win that would not fade when the feelings did, and I took it, clean and calm, and I left them with the one truth they cannot recycle into a new story, which is that I am done asking to be seen. I do not wonder whether I went too far. I know exactly how far I went, and I know why, and if you are still listening for a verdict, here it is in plain language you can take with you. I turned the table without raising my voice. I saved the person who would not have saved me. I kept the proof, and I walked away knowing that from now on they will think twice before serving me anything dressed up as love.